Thank you. Thank you. I guess to begin, I want to say what this is not. I'll be like St. Thomas. I'll start with what isn't and then talk about what is. So, what it is not is transporting you all to Central and South America and showing you pictures. There will be pictures at the end, about 7 minutes worth. But that's not what this is. This is more about some personal reflections on how I came to do what I did. Looking back on it, I was in Central and South America for 28 years before I came back to the States last March. But when you talk about mission, missionary, that's not limited just to something like this or those movies, you know, all those glorious movies of the missioners going off to some island and saving the pagans. And that's not what this is. They're already saved. You don't need to go and save them. So anyway, we're all missionaries, and we're all missioned by our baptism. We are. We carry out the mission of Jesus. When we think about that, we remember, yeah, we're made in the image and likeness of God. God's image. There's something of God in each one of us. And this God that we talk about is the God that we talked about in Advent and Christmas, who became human. And the more human we are, the closer we are to that God. So that's where I'm coming from with this. We're all in mission. We're all sent. Sent where? Sent on some journey. We're all on a journey. But it isn't just an outer journey that we go through. This is as much about an inner journey that I went through as it is about the journey in the 3 countries that I placed myself in. In God's likeness, we do what God did and what God does, which is to love. That's the image and likeness. We become who we are. Children of God, brothers and sisters of one another. That's exactly what we're called to be. So, the Dalai Lama, for example, when someone asked him, what's the best religion? He said, the one that makes you more human. And I believe that. I do believe that. And what happened to me in the course of the 28 years was something like that. It made a change in me, and I began to see others in a different way and see myself in a different way. So let's begin this story. Once upon a time, there was a young woman in college. She wasn't finished college yet, but she was in college. Can you hear me? Okay. This young woman was in a Dominican college, as she had been in a Dominican high school. And she was very impressed with the Dominican sisters who taught her, and they were wonderful teachers. And she wanted to be a teacher. So in the course of time, it turned out, all of a sudden, she decided that she was going to be a religious. Now, that did not come like St. Paul. You know, I wasn't knocked off a horse. It was more like Sunday's gospel, last Sunday's gospel, when these persons who were coming up to Jesus, they say, where do you live? And he says, what are you looking for? And then in the course of the conversation, he says, come and see. It was more like that. But you know, the beauty of that story is what else is in there at the end when it says that they remembered forever the time of 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they spoke with Jesus. To me, that's the beauty of that story. Anyhow, I wanted to be a teacher. I was a teacher. Actually, I was a disaster in grade school. I have to admit that I am not a grade school teacher. I began to teach in high school, and of all things, Latin. And then I was at that high school for 24 years. Now, Ginny McCormick can tell you that. She was there. That's right. So, what else did I do? There I was, 24 years later. I was 50 years old. More than 50, I think. But anyway, I was over 50. I had been 24 years in the same high school. And suddenly there came up this possibility of a tour, a study tour, to go to El Salvador and Mexico. And for some reason, I said yes, I'd love to do that. So I did. I came back and I resigned. I was principal at the time. I resigned. I took a year sabbatical. And at the end of that year, I found myself saying, I think I want to go to the mission. Now, I don't know where that came from, but anyway, that was there. And I thought, well, I'll need all the help I can get. So I went to talk to the Maryknoll sisters. And the Maryknollers are the missioners. And I found myself signing a contract with Maryknoll. I did, and I renewed it too. So for 8.5 years, I was a Maryknoll sister associate, meaning I was on loan to them, and I worked with, or wherever the Maryknoll sisters were. And it took me, but part of that was there was a discernment. I made a discernment for a month. We have all these people who were discerning about, lay missioners who were discerning about going. And I thought to myself, well, I'm over 50. They're going to tell me I'm too old. I don't know Spanish. There's no reason for you to go. So I was there 3 days, and it was so clear to me. It was as clear as a bell that this was the way to go. So that's what I did. I spent time with Maryknoll, and then they assigned me to Bolivia. Now, Bolivia is interesting. The Maryknoll fathers originally were in China. They got thrown out of China after World War II in 1942. They were thrown out. In 1943, the Maryknoll sisters went. Usually wherever the fathers were in mission, there were Maryknoll sisters. And so the Maryknoll sisters started there in 1943. And later on, Bolivia was, boonies. It was the jungle, and I mean jungle. I'll show you some pictures of that. It was just way, way out. They started a rural pastoral institute where a pilot and a guitarist or a musician and a priest or myself would go out on the boat a month at a time. There are 13 tributaries to the Amazon River. And we would go on one of those rivers. Some of them were only 2-week trips, but most of them were a month. Visiting places along the way. In 1969, the Maryknoll fathers had brought in people from way out in the jungle into the town. Well, into the town, yeah. The town, Riberalta, which is it's in the northeast of Bolivia, just about an hour away from Brazil. And they formed delegates of the word, and because they didn't get mass very often, that was for sure, so they trained them how to do a ceremony of the word. And they would come downriver for a month at a time to get this training, then go back to their communities. And then the river team would go out on a trip and probably visit about 50 communities in the course of a month. And we would go maybe 4 or 5 hours a day on the boat and get to a place and go in. Sometimes it was a couple of hours to go in. And that night, we would have a celebration of the word. And that's where there were sacraments. I did baptisms. The bishop had given me permission to do weddings as well. So that was also part of the scene. Those were interesting. You'd go 1 month and you take all the information, you go back to Riberalta and try to find out where they were baptized and get all that information. Then you'd go up on the next river trip and find out they weren't even there, or they didn't even know each other. So it was very, very rare. But anyway, I did perform some weddings on that. But so that's what I did for 8.5 years. And there were other things too that when I was in the town in Bolivia, in Riberalta, I would visit a hospital that the Maryknoll Sisters had founded. It was a wonderful ministry for me. So then, what did I do after that? I had visitors while I was there. Margaret Ormond and Ellen Dunn came to visit me at one point. I didn't realize they were both petrified of mosquitoes and heat. So they're on the boat, and Margaret is inside her mosquito net, and I'm inside my mosquito net, and she decides we're going to play cards. So she gets a deck of cards, and she slips the card under the screen, the mosquito net, and then I look at mine, and I put mine under for her, and this went on during the trip. Then we get into the community. Now, they both had one of these hooded jackets, covered here, covered here. The temperature was 102 degrees, but they didn't want to be exposed to the mosquitoes. So that was one. So then we come in from the trip, and I said to them, do you want to go visit the infectious disease hospital? Margaret says, not on your life. So I had other visitors too. My sister came. She wanted to make sure that I was sane. And she did come, and she did come out on the river with me, which was a wonderful time for her. And she wrote an article, The Journey of Jungle Joan, about that whole trip. And but it was good. It was really good. And then Germaine Conroy also appeared on the scene. And she came out on the boat with me for a longer period of time, and steering the boat and so on. And it was pouring rain, but there were holes in the ceiling of the boat. So we looked for all the kettles that we had, and we hung them from nails all inside the boat. We didn't catch all the water, but we caught quite a bit of it. Then I moved on to, well, after 8.5 years, I thought, well, what do I do now? I still wanted to be doing something like that. So I went to Peru, where our Dominican sisters, St. Mary of the Springs, had been, and actually while I was in Bolivia, I came to the 25th anniversary. It was 91, Toma? It was something like that. I came over for that anniversary. So I wasn't there very long, but I did have opportunities to visit the hospital, to do some radio work, working with someone on the radio every week, and also whatever the sisters were doing. It was very interesting to see. They've been there for 25 years, you know, and had a wonderful ministry going there. Then I moved to, they seemed to be asking for, the Dominican friars seemed to be asking for help in Honduras. So I thought, well, I'll try that. It was also a very hot climate, hotter than Bolivia, really. And so I went to Honduras, and I stayed there 18 years, and that's where I came back from last March. Honduras, again, a different culture. I did many different things. I was very involved in prison work. I don't know if you know anything about San Pedro Sula, but it's been known as the most violent city in the world. And it's sort of famous for that. That's where I was, and I was in the prison and the gangs and all the rest of it. It was a wonderful experience. So it just was marvelous. When we left, the prisoners had a party for us. And they were so funny. They wrote poetry, they did all kinds of things. But see, we prepared them for, they did everything to prepare a liturgy. They did everything really in there. We just were kind of onlooking the scene. But the funniest part of that, saying goodbye to them, was when we went to leave, they formed a line here and a line here. I felt like somebody coming out onto a football field. That's what it was like. And since that time, if you haven't read the newspaper, Honduras is in a lot of trouble right now. It's a very, very dangerous. They're contesting the election results. Someone was reelected, even though the Constitution says you can't be reelected. He reappointed judges that would change that so that he could be elected. There was only 1% difference in the vote count, and they started a recount, and he stopped it. So that's what the fuss is all about now. The whole country is paralyzed. The inauguration is next Thursday. Remains to be seen what will happen. It could easily be a more violent situation. There is a delegation of religious, Dominican sisters, Jesuits, because they have a Jesuit there who is like the Honduran Oscar Romero, who has been down there for a long time. He's a Honduran. And he's Padre Melo. He's a wonderful man. He's asked for help from the religious in the United States. So we'll see how that works out. And the idea is to give some witness and talk to people. There have been deaths, there have been all kinds. We went through this in 2009. I was there when the coup happened in 2009. It's the same thing all over again, and I don't know what the answer is going to be at some point. The other thing that I was involved in there, we had a Dominican family, lay folks, who the Dominican friars who were first there was like a Father Brian Pierce, and if you know that name, and there were other Dominican fathers who were there. And they invited, it was the lay folks who went to them and said, how can we help? And from that group that was formed, and they had a lot of good formation, when the friars, the North American friars went, now there are friars from Costa Rica, from, I forget where, but it's not, it's a Central American province. But the lay folk have assumed they preach. We found a parish that would let us preach. And once a month we got to preach, and we would meet every week to go over the readings for that Sunday. Very involved in many, many activities and many, many projects. That is one of the beauties of that time in Honduras, was working with committed persons who really wanted to, be Dominican. And they are Dominican, and they put OP after their name precisely for that. I arrived there 2 weeks after Hurricane Mitch. And that was kind of a disaster, because there was nothing. I mean, I was on a health brigade going out into the boonies for that, and you just saw, and the people are poor. The people in Bolivia, it had nothing. People in Honduras, now they do have a middle class. They have a wealthy class as well that dominates, and they have a very poor class as well. So, let's see. Anyhow, regarding all of this, it was a journey, and it was not just an outer journey. Yes, I went to Bolivia, and I went to Honduras, and I went to Peru. But it was an inner journey. It's a little like ourselves in the course of lifetime. We have an outer journey. We're here, and then we're there, and then we're there. But there's also going on at the same time something inside that's changing me, or questioning me, or saying, come and see, try this. How many careers do people have in the course of a lifetime? There's all of that. It's a call within a call. And that's what I think. Another, in Honduras, something that was very dear to my heart. Honduras is the capital of AIDS and HIV in the world. We had a program that was so that the families could take care of the children, not put them in an institution, but take care of the family whose children were HIV. And we had that program for 18 years while I was there. We had to close the house where it was serving, but the program is continuing in another way because there are children who got to school, got scholarships. There were 8 who graduated from high school last year, the first ones to graduate, who are all HIV. But see, they would get eliminated from school, or, you know, nobody wanted anything to do with them. And I've been fortunate. I have some high school and college friends who like to know what's going on, and they keep those kids in school. I just heard from them the other day. There will be 8 more who will graduate this year down there. And they're very savvy kids after a while. You know, one of them came in the office one day and he says, what did he say? "You guys got any wireless around here?" They're very adept at modern stuff, because it is a city, but the problem with the gangs is a real problem. If you get caught in that, you really can't get out. You know, God speaks to us through our experiences, if we listen. The Spanish have a lovely song, Dios está aquí. Does anybody know it? Dios está aquí. God is here in the air we breathe, in the morning when the sun rises. God is here when we speak to one another. God is here. That was what I experienced in all 3 countries, that God was speaking through these wonderful people. And I learned so much about living in the present moment. It's just, for me, you know, and telling stories. You know, that's what Jesus did. He told a story. The disciples told their story. And they kept on, their followers kept on telling the story. And that's what we do. And that's what we're called to do.
You want to show the pictures?
Yeah, you're looking at, Okay, I would just end this with, someone gave me advice once about being in mission. It said, first of all, accompany the people, dialogue with them, and then celebrate with them. And that's what I did. But they were doing it with me, and that's what we're called to do. Accompany, whether it's your family, whether it's your work, whether it's your whatever. Accompany, listen, dialogue with them, listen. We all have a story to tell, you know. Okay, let me see what I can do here. Where is he? Oh, okay. Oh, and something else that, just to share it with you, I came home in March and I really wanted to share the story a little bit. And all along I kept 28 journals, books, while I was in Bolivia in little notebooks. And I wrote newsletters while I was in Honduras. So what I decided to do was to write about it. And this is it. It's called For Those with a Journey to Make. And on the back, there's a picture of the boat. So there it is. And thanks to, I had the material, but I was determined I was going to have something to say. And thanks to Mary Ellen George, who was my editor and formatted this for me. Okay. Let's see. These things will come out, let's see, Bolivia. That's years ago, 1988. And that's Bolivia. We're way up there, right next to Brazil. And this was out on the river. The people are beautiful. Children are absolutely, they're like kids anywhere. That's the boat. I lived on that a month at a time for 8.5 years. Their children die very easily there. It's primitive, but it's,
Gets you where you're going.
yeah. Palm Sunday, you just pull the palms off the tree. They certainly have kept the faith over the years. The Mary Knowlers went there in 1969.
Are they still there?
No, not on the river team. Everything is community. You know, we do it together or we don't do it. That's very common. The poverty that they live in is just incredible. There's Jermaine. In the bad weather, it sometimes gets very flooded. That's what sunset looks like on the river. It's just gorgeous. Okay, that's one. Now I have another one here. Let's see. Bolivia, Honduras. You can see we're surrounded by Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. This was after Hurricane Mitch, and it was in a place where all people were. They had no place to go. How do you like to drive in that? This was the school with the children and this wonderful teacher. They closed the prisons in San Pedro Sula. People didn't like the idea of having a prison in their city. So they built these super prisons out in the boonies and sent them all there.
So the prisoners were able to come out to do the Stations of the Cross in that last?
Yeah, they come out of their, we could do that. That one before that was the house that we had for the children with HIV. And this is the kids at the end of the school year. Yes, it was. They could, when we handed over that territory to the state, they wouldn't let them have a religious name on the school. It was Martin de Porres. So the teacher, unbeknownst to me, changed it.
That's nice.
So it's still going.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. We also, this was with the delegates of the Word. They would come in and spend 8 days with us while we taught them how to preach. And this was, we always had a big to-do on December 1st. This is the prison. Some wonderful people, very contemplative people I met there.
What did they do with the building?
Oh, they're going to make some kind of a park or a whatever. They just don't want. And we had a lot, like we had family days, and
Where did the prisoners go?
they sent them to other prisons. And all of them are these horrible, they call them the pits. This sister was from San Sixto in Rome, Dominicans, who are working there with the Garifuna population, which is, they were coming over from Africa and they got shipwrecked and they landed up north there. These are some of our kids that we used to have programs for them. These are the same thing where the Garifunas first landed, but everybody's trying to take that land from them because it's good tourist attraction.
My goodness, look at that.
These are twins, and they're cute. Their mother used to bring the two of them. We used to have a meeting every week with the families.
Is that a house?
No, actually, it's probably an outhouse.
I was hoping.
That's it.